Good evening. Good to see everyone. We are in Genesis chapter 24 tonight. 24 and part of 25. Genesis 24. I love this chapter. Christine, do you share my excitement for this story? If Hallmark movies were a thing 3,000 years ago, this would be one, okay? It is time to find a wife for Isaac, the son of promise. Now, was it 2 classes ago, Sarah died. So, do you remember how old we said Isaac was when his mother Sarah died? 37, okay? And how old is Isaac when he gets married according to this chapter? He's 40. Yeah, okay, so this is 3 years after Sarah's death, all right? So it's time to find a wife. So Abraham calls for a servant in verse 2, the oldest of his household. So this is a task that is given to the most seasoned and mature servant. This is a critically important task because not only is Abraham going the way of all the earth, to use the biblical expression, and he is looking forward to what is coming for his son Isaac, but remember that promise that God made. The promise was beyond just Isaac, right? Isaac is the son of promise, yes, but this promise is going to reach far into the future. So we got to get Isaac married. If this promise is going to continue, it can't just be Isaac the bachelor, okay? So, okay, it was going back on me for some reason. All right, so Abraham calls this servant and he swears an oath with him. I learned something new about this. I have read this, I don't know how many times, where it says in verse 2, Abraham charged the servant, "Please place your hand under my thigh, and I will swear by the Lord," and so forth. Then in verse 9, the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. I don't know how many times I have read that, and I did not know what that expression meant. And I suspect you didn't either.
Testament.
I'm sorry?
Testament.
Yeah, but I'm talking specifically about this. Okay, all right. So, okay, you do know where I'm going. All right. I learned today, as I was reading a little bit more about this, because I just knew somebody was going to raise their hand and say, what is all this business about putting the hand under the thigh? What does that mean? So I did a little reading on that, and here's what I came up with. This is a Hebrew euphemism. This is not literally someone taking their hand and putting it underneath a person's thigh, which is kind of what I thought it was, just assuming that that's what that meant. So this is an ancient custom that combined an oath with a symbolic gesture. So I want you to hold your marker here, put your finger here in Genesis 24, flip over to Exodus 1 and verse 5. Exodus 1, verse 5. All the persons who came from the loins of Jacob were 70 in number. Joseph was already in Egypt. From the loins of Jacob. That word loins, what are we talking about here? All the people who came from what? This is Jacob's descendants, right? Okay, but there again is this term, they came from the loins of Jacob. Okay, so when you think about that, you think about the midsection of Jacob, right? Okay, that's the same word in Exodus 1:5 that's used here in Genesis 24 in verse 2, placing the hand under the thigh, placing the hand on the loins. That's really the idea. So really, we're not talking so much about the man's thighs as much as we are talking about what's between the thighs. Okay, I'm trying to not be crass. Okay? So the idea, I think, seems to be this. Abraham sees this event, finding a wife for Isaac, as critically important for fulfilling the promise that God has made through his son, through Abraham's descendants. This is a very serious matter. So Abraham calls this servant, and he makes him take this oath to carry this through, because if the servant fails in this, then what else fails? Abraham's progeny. Where does your progeny come from? Your loins. And so Abraham quite literally has his servant place his hands on, or at least very close to, the instrument that produces progeny. Are you with me? Now, here's the significance of this. If the servant fails in this, then Abraham's progeny fails. And by entering into this oath, the servant is almost saying, okay, and if I fail and your progeny thus fails, then may it also be to me. May my progeny fail too. Okay? You guys ready to move on and talk about something different? All right. One of the many thousands of reasons I'm glad I don't live in the ancient world. All right. But I knew somebody was going to ask me about that, so I felt like I should be prepared. Now, when Abraham wants the servant to go and find a wife for Isaac, where does he tell him to go and why? Go back to our kindred, go back to our folks in where? In Haran. Yeah. Where we came from. Where Abraham leaves in Genesis 12. When God said to him, get up, get out of your country, get away from your people, and go to the land that I will show you. Abraham says, do not find a wife from among the Canaanites. Go to my homeland. Go to my family. In verse 7, Abraham says, the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, from the land of my birth, who spoke to me. Okay, now look toward the end of the verse. He will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. Abraham believes that God is going to be with this effort. And so he sends this servant off with God's blessing. Now the servant says, okay, well, what if I find her and she's not willing to come? Then Abraham says, then you're free from this oath. You don't have to fulfill it. I don't want you to, tie her up and drag her here. But this oath is taken, and now the servant is going to go and search for a wife. So in verse 10 of chapter 24, the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master, and he set out with a variety of good things of his master's hand. And we'll find out what some of those are momentarily. And he went to Mesopotamia, the city of Nahor. Most likely, as I understand it, that's not the name of the city. That's where Nahor, Abraham's relative, lives. It's the city where he lives, okay? Not the name of the city, although it could be that. Some think it is that. If we're right in thinking that the servant is traveling to Haran area, northern Mesopotamia, northwestern Mesopotamia, then this is a journey that would take 3 or 4 weeks. Okay? If you're traveling in a much larger caravan, then it would take longer than that. But one servant with a handful of camels and some things, he could certainly move a lot faster than if this was a large caravan filled with people. So he leaves with 10 camels, other possessions, but more importantly, he leaves with great faith in God, that God is going to see him through this effort and that this is going to be a success. So he prays, beginning in verse 12, Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today. Show loving kindness to my master Abraham. And he says in verse 14, when he comes to the place, when he gets to the region of Abraham's family, he settles by a spring. It's time to stop and rest, and the camels need water to drink. And so in this prayer, he asks that God would bless this effort by a woman who comes with a pitcher ready to draw water, and if she would come and serve him and also provide for the camels, then that would be the way that he would know that this is the woman. And so in verse 14, the one who answers to me, drink, and I will water your camels also. God, if I could have a woman who comes to the spring and she offers me a drink and she offers to water the camels, then that's how I'll know that I found the right one. And you keep reading, and that's exactly what happens. I'm struck by verse 15, where it says, before he finished speaking, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. While the servant is still praying, God has already answered the prayer. Here comes this beautiful woman, Rebekah. Verse 16 says she was very beautiful. She was a virgin. No man had relations with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. And he said, could you give me a drink? And she gives him a drink. But not only that, what else does she do? She waters those 10 camels that the servant has. Did you see the note in the Waldron's book about how much camels can drink? Okay, this was not just filling up the pitcher a couple of times. Okay, those camels could drink gallons of water. This would have been several fillings of the pitcher to give to those camels and make sure they had enough. Now, while this is happening, verse 20, I think this is so interesting. She quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all of his camels. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. He's just prayed, God, if a woman could come with a jar and serve me and serve all the camels, then that would just be great. I would know that she's the one. And that's exactly what happens minutes after he prays it. And now he's thinking, could this really? Wow, this is incredible. He's silently thinking. He's watching Rebekah as she is watering the camels, and he's thinking, wow, this is amazing. He sees this as a clear sign of God's providence. Because you look at verse 26, the man bowed low and worshiped the Lord, and he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. The Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. He didn't have to think about this very long. Compare the end of verse 20, where it says she drew water for the camels. Meanwhile, verse 21, the man is gazing at her in silence, thinking about this. Then verse 22, when the camels finished drinking. So he wasn't having to ponder this for too long. When the camels finish, he says, okay, she's the one. And then, Emma, you know what he does? He gives her a gold nose ring. Listen, if a man ever gives you a nose ring, okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on you. All right, so I tried to do some reading about the nose ring thing, and I read some different ideas, and I don't really want to go there. I know if Stacy had given me a nose ring when we first met, I'm not so sure how I would have taken that, but maybe if I had given her one, I don't know. She's probably watching live stream right now. I'll answer for that later. He gives her a golden ring, a nose ring, and he gives her bracelets to wear. What's he doing? Why is he giving her these things? Maybe a token gesture of gratitude, right? Thank you for serving me. Thank you for serving the camels. Oh, hey, there's a lot more where that came from. If you're interested, I'm here on a specific mission. I'm searching for somebody. You could be the lucky winner, okay? All right. So Rebekah leads the servant home to tell her family about all the things that have happened, because this really is an incredible thing. When he asks, who are you? Who is your family? Where are you from? And she sees this as a really important step. Joe?
Two things. One, I tend to think this is Eleazar of Damascus.
Yeah, that's a common idea. Yep.
I just think that he's probably seen all of these things that Abraham's gone through and all the faith that Abraham's had, and so he's been a witness to all this. I think it's a testament to the impact of an individual with a faith like Abraham has on the circle around him, that because he's praying to God, so he obviously has his own personal faith in the God of Abraham. But my other question was, you can understand later when, God forbid,
So I didn't read anything about that. The only guess that I would venture, and it would be a guess, is that although Abraham's kinfolk that he left back in Mesopotamia may not be of the same faith that he is, right, believing in the true God, at least they're family, and he does know who they are, right? And the Canaanite people, you think about some of the stories that we've been through already, there are some indications, think Sodom and Gomorrah, other cities of the plain, where Abraham would say, man, I couldn't even find 10 righteous people in that city. I don't want to look for a woman from this bunch. That'd be my only thought. Good question. All right. So now the servant is going back to Rebekah's family's home, and now he has to persuade her father. Her brother Laban also has a prominent role in this process. And he has to convince them that he is truly there for good reasons and that his master Abraham is worth allowing this to happen. So Rebekah's brother Laban, and remember that name because we're going to see him again, Laban sees the gifts that she has received. My sister came home with a nose ring. I'd probably notice that too. But he sees the nose ring and he sees the bracelets, okay? And he says, wow, something has happened. So he listens to her story and then they welcome the servant into their home. Once again, the camels were cared for. There was food that was set before the servant. Every gesture of hospitality was given to this traveler. And Abraham's servant says, I'm not going to eat anything until I have told you my business here. I'm not eating anything until I say why I'm here. So Laban and Bethuel, Rebekah's father, says, okay, let's hear it. And he explains the whole story. And he goes through everything, really down to the very words that were spoken in the early part of the chapter. So much of this is repeated information. But once he goes through all of this, then you see the response in verse 50. Laban and Bethuel replied, the matter comes from the Lord. Your translation might render it in some way like, this truly is from the Lord, or something like that. They listened to the story that Rebekah gave, and then now that the servant gave, and they say, wow, okay, the hand of God is with this. We see that this is providential. So, Joe, we may be answering your question to some degree here. Look at what these family members are saying, right? Truly, this is from the Lord. Well, does that mean that they have the same understanding that Abraham does? Well, not necessarily, but at least they seem to be conscious of who the true God is. So there may be something here.
I was saying this later on with Laban having household idols, maybe this will
Yeah, that's right. All right, now, verse 51. Here is Rebekah, take her and go and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. So they see this, and they are agreeable to this. Now, once that happens, again, I'm so impressed with Abraham's servant. Verse 52, when he heard their words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. So once again, he thanks God, he worships God, and he's so grateful that he has found success for his master Abraham by finding this woman. And then verse 53, he starts passing out more articles of silver and gold and clothing and giving them to Rebekah. He gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. Again, that would be a sign to Bethuel, her father, and Laban, her brother. Wow, we are sending her off to a wealthy family. Okay, she will be taken care of. She will be provided for. This is really good. But more importantly than that, and this is not really what's highlighted so much in the story, but we are sending our daughter, we're sending my sister off to a family of the quality that Abraham is, right? He is a respected man. He is a highly regarded prince, as we saw when he buried Sarah. Alan, did you have a comment? I thought you were putting your hand up.
No, but maybe in a moment.
Okay. Now, Abraham's servant spends the night. Obviously, he's been traveling for a long time. He rests, and the next morning, he's ready to go home. I mean, he's got the truck cranked up. and he's ready. And Rebekah's family says, wait, do you have to take her right now? Can she stay here for at least 10 days? Now that seems reasonable, doesn't it? But the servant says, don't withhold, okay? I've got to get going. Don't slow me down. So they leave it up to Rebekah. Do you want to go right now? Do you want to stay for a little while and then go? What do you want to do? She says, I am ready to go. I need another nose ring. No, I don't think she said that. That's not in my Bible. But she's excited about this, and she's ready to go. So she agrees, and the family pronounces a blessing on her. I think that's right around verse 60, and then off they go. Success on the journey. So then, you come to your comment yet? Or you want me to finish the whole chapter and then come back to you?
Go ahead and finish your thought, and then I do have something.
Okay. All right. So then the chapter ends as they are returning. It says that Isaac goes out into a field. This is verse 63. He went out into a field to meditate, some translations say. Yours might say he took a walk. He went for a stroll. It's literally what the word means. He's going for a walk out in the field. Why would he be doing that? Because he's meditating. He's going out to think. And while he is walking in the field, he sees camels coming. He sees this caravan coming. Rebekah sees Isaac. Who is that? That's our master's son. She puts a veil on her face, covers herself, and then she is greeted by Isaac, and they are married. And it says in verse 67, Rebekah became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay. Alan, what you got?
I was always surprised at Rebekah's willingness to go like this, but in this study,
You should have seen the nose ring.
I realized at the end of chapter 22, after Abraham is offered Isaac, he gets word about his family and him, about who is born to his brother, and so
Right.
apparently there's some communication between them in some way, even though they are separated by hundreds of miles, perhaps thousands of miles. There's still a connection there. And when this servant comes and says, I am Abraham's servant, they also know something of Abraham. If it's going one way, it's probably going the other way.
Yeah, that's a really great observation. So if I remember right, I think I read a few days ago that the distance here was approximately 550 miles or so. Okay? So
Is that straight line, or is that the route that you walk?
I think that's as the camel flies. So Alan's comment, if you didn't hear what he said, was we get this report at the end of chapter 22 when Isaac is still a lad. This is after Abraham was ready to offer him. We get this, Abraham gets a report that there has been some increase in his brother's family, including Rebekah. And so Alan said, it's probably likely that if news is traveling one way, from Haran down to Canaan, it's probably traveling the other way too. Isaac and Rebekah were probably not strangers. No, they've probably not met face to face before. Almost certainly they haven't. But maybe they at least knew of each other's existence, right? Yeah, I think that's a valid point.
Or, if nothing else, the status of Abraham.
Yes, yeah, which was widely known. Yeah, absolutely. All right, good. Christine.
Just really quick. So we're learning about this quarter so that next quarter when our children, mind you, I have two in high school, when they come.
You don't have to talk about the hand under the thigh. You don't have to do that.
I just want to make sure that you're all under the same conclusion that just because it happened here, just because you meet somebody in 10 days, that you have to go to parent. That's all.
Oh man, I have so much I could say about this. So okay, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you something, and this is not a lie, okay? Like I talked about on Sunday, people say, hand on the Bible. Okay, I'm not doing that. But this afternoon, because of this story, I was working on a sermon based on this about searching for a spouse. Because I do some youth weekend things at different places, and sometimes they want to talk about things like this. And so I think there's some good stuff here, okay? All right. No, I said youth weekend. No, I see your point, and I understand what you're saying. And obviously, we're dealing with cultures and times and things, right? But I will say this, because as a father of girls, right, I'm thinking about. Oh, it was like 15 minutes. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Stacy and I were total strangers. We were not pen pals who knew about each other and so forth. We were total strangers. We met June the 12th, and we were married on December the 12th. Okay? All right. You are good. You are good. So I tried to think about, okay, what if Rebekah was my daughter, right? How would I be feeling about this scenario? And of course, there would be a massive lump in my throat, and I would be nervous and so forth. But if my daughter was going to the house of Abraham, man, I sure would feel a lot better about it, And I don't just mean because Abraham's immensely wealthy, but the quality of family that we're dealing with here, I would feel much better about it, yeah. Yeah, right. Okay, God's hand must be all over this because, before the servant was done praying, there she was with the jar of water. All right, very good. Anything else about this story? Yes, Sandy.
Well, and please remember that it's very hard for us to put our reasoning into what happened because daughters were property. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't love her, but I mean, there's so many stories throughout the Old Testament. Sometimes daughters are used in a very bad way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different culture and time. Absolutely.
They
Yep.
did what they were told
Yeah.
to do.
Yep.
Lot offered his daughters to
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yes, I'm a big believer in arranged marriages. Wait, did I say that out loud? No, I didn't say that, did I? So, if you guys know anybody, I'm searching already. I'm searching. All right, so I want you to look. You don't have to do it now because you may not even have the book with you, okay? But I do want you to look in the Lamp to My Feet book on page 79. There is a little bit of chronology work to do that I think is helpful. So on page 79 and on page 80, there's another one of these. There's a light gray box that says chronology note in it. And I want you to go through and do that. It will say, how old was Abraham when Isaac was born? Okay, then how old was Sarah when she died? And you kind of start going through looking at the ages, and then it helps you develop a time frame for the story. Okay, so we started off the class saying, how old was Isaac when his mother died? He was 37. How old was he when he married Rebekah? He was 40. So how long had it been after Sarah's death that Isaac was married? It was 3 years, right? That's what that first chronology box is on page 79. And it just helps you realize, okay, this is the time frame. This is where we are. Okay? Now, let's go into chapter 25. And let's talk about Abraham and Keturah, and then Abraham's death. I'm also going to plug the same chronology information on page 79. This is not the gray box, but the discussion about Abraham and Keturah on page 79 is really helpful. I am going to read this to you. You may not have your book, and that's fine. So if you'll just let me read this may be helpful. Chapter 25, let's start with the scripture. Verse 1, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and she bore to him these children. Then verse 5, Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and so forth. Okay. When did Abraham marry Keturah? When did he take her as a concubine? Now, it's recorded here in Genesis 25 right before his death. But I'm not convinced that that's when he took her as an additional concubine. Do you remember what is said when Sarah became pregnant at age 90 about Abraham, who was how old at that point? He was 100, okay? And Abraham even said, am I going to have a child at age 100? The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 4 says that Abraham at age 100 was as good as dead, meaning he was a really old man. This would have been an absolute miracle for him to have a child and for Sarah to have a child at their ages, 190. 190, not 190, right? Okay. If it was an incredible miracle for Abraham to have a son at age 100, it doesn't seem very likely that long after Isaac is born, and Sarah is now dead, and Abraham is 140, that he's now going to have 6 more kids? It seems that this section about Abraham's marriage to Keturah is actually chronologically out of place. He was probably married to Keturah as a concubine at the same time he had Hagar as a concubine years before, when he actually could produce children from his not-so-old body. You say, well, then why is it included here? Well, it wasn't mentioned earlier because it didn't help the narrative that Moses is wanting us to see about the son of promise being Isaac. It just wasn't. It muddies the water. So he throws it in here at the end as we come to the end of Abraham's life. Oh, by the way, Abraham had another concubine and he had some other sons, but they really don't factor in all that much in the story of God's people. Okay? Joe?
It says that he gave them gifts while he was still living. So at a minimum, it had been enough time for them to come of age while he was alive.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point too. So Abraham, Joe's comment was that he gave gifts to his sons of his concubines in verse 6. Well, did he give them those gifts, lands or sheep or cattle or whatever, when they were toddlers and little kids? No, they were grown men. They were adults, and they could have handled those gifts, which must mean that he had them earlier in life, okay? All right. So Abraham, verses 7 through 11, we have Abraham's death recorded. Very little said by comparison to what is given about Sarah's death and the purchasing of the cave at Machpelah. But Abraham, verse 9, is also buried in the same cave. Who buried him, by the way, according to verse 9? Did you catch this? Isaac and who? Ishmael. Where did we last see Ishmael? When Ishmael and Hagar were both given the boot, right? Abraham had to send them away because, once again, there was conflict over that. But Ishmael comes back for his father's funeral. Then in verse 11, after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac. And Isaac lived by Beer Lahai Roi, which is the place that his mother Hagar named back in Genesis chapter 16. But not to forget Ishmael, verses 12 through 18, we're given the record of his descendants. And of the descendants of Ishmael that are mentioned, there are 12 that are recorded here. If you go back to Genesis 17 and verse 20, God tells Abraham, don't worry about Ishmael's future. I will take care of him. He will be the father of 12 sons. And he was. That was fulfilled as it's recorded here in Genesis 25. And then Ishmael dies in verse 17. The years of life of Ishmael, 137. He breathed his last and died, was gathered to his people. Okay. So on Sunday, we're going to pick up verse 19. We're going to keep working through the next section. Okay? Any questions? Oh, too bad. Sorry. Out of time. No, let me know if you have them. Thanks, everybody.